Thank you for joining us at CPHI China Virtual Expo Connect. We're pleased to welcome you to this session on early stage considerations for the manufacture and delivery of vaccines, sponsored by Stevanato Group. I'll start by introducing our sponsor. Stevanato Group is the world's largest privately owned designer and producer of glass primary packaging for the pharma industry. From its outset, the group has developed its own glass converting technology to ensure the highest standards of quality. The group comprises a wide set of capabilities dedicated to serving the biopharmaceutical and diagnostic industries, from glass containers with its historical brand Ompi, to high-precision plastic diagnostic and medical components, to contract manufacturing for drug delivery devices, vision inspection systems, assembly, and packaging equipment. The group also provides analytical and testing services to study container closure integrity and integration into drug delivery devices, streamlining the drug development process. Thanks to its unique approach as a one-stop shop, Stevanato Group offers an unprecedented set of solutions to biopharma companies for a faster time to market and a reduced total cost of ownership. We have three great speakers for you today who will be covering the vaccine drug development market and packaging solutions which de-risk the drug development process, manage costs, and facilitate speed to market. I'd now like to introduce our first presenter, Yasemin Karanis, Senior Consultant at IQVIA. Yasemin is a consultant in the European Thought Leadership team based in IQVIA's London office. Her primary areas of focus are trends in innovative launches, drug delivery and formulations, as well as the oncology market, with an emphasis on commercial trends. She has presented and moderated panels on these subjects in a variety of conferences. Yasemin holds a Master's in Cancer Research and a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Sciences, both from Newcastle University. Prior to her role in thought leadership, Yasemin was part of Real World Insights Global Oncology team, where she worked on the coordination and setup of reports focusing on various cancers. So welcome, Yasemin, and over to you.
Thank you, Tara. So in this presentation, we will take a look at the post-COVID pharmaceutical environment, a look at the COVID-19 vaccines that are being developed, and the important role of packaging and drug delivery solutions in the stages that are to come following the launch of vaccine candidates. The COVID-19 pandemic is having a major impact on pharmaceutical markets worldwide. In this slide, we're using the IQVIA market prognosis database, and we're taking a look at historic growth on the x-axis and forecasted growth on the y-axis. These numbers are based on ex-manufacturer list price and include hospital and retail channels. Overall, global pharmaceutical market sales are forecasted to slow to a compound annual growth rate of 4.2% in 2019 to 2022. So this is down from the 4.9 seen between 2016 and 2019. So global pharma will continue to grow, however, growth will be dampened by COVID-19 and other pressures such as the reinforced trend to generics. The pandemic, of course, plays a big role in the dip we see in this forecast, generally as a result of the massive disruption to normal healthcare activities and spending, as well as the economies that are affected. Across geographies, heavy stockpiling trends were observed initially, reported prior to the introduction of lockdowns. However, subsequently, demand for pharmaceuticals was severely affected due to disruption in healthcare services, movement restrictions, and patient avoidance of hospitals and clinics. New to brand switches, which is an important pharmaceutical market growth driver in the developed markets, have been affected by the pandemic. And as a result of some of the disruptions we've mentioned already, as well as the disruptions in new product launches and promotional activity. And other downward pressures on the overall pharma sales are general pricing pressures and loss of exclusivities globally. And we are at the start of the true impact of the pandemic as we witness the unfolding of three crises on top of each other, which is shown in this slide. First, we have the pandemic crisis, which is drawing funds that are already under pressure, and this is leading to payer and patient out-of-pocket constraints, as well as creating public investment challenges that delay capital spend on healthcare systems unless forced. We will also observe private investment challenges, for example, as biotech and startup companies potentially see lower investments going forward. On the other side, we have the healthcare system crisis unfolding, mainly driven by the non-COVID patient backlog as a result of the major disruptions observed. Healthcare systems globally are stretched as a result of managing the pandemic, the patient backlog, as well as routine care simultaneously. There is uncertainty and risk going forward as multiple waves of infection mean a new steady state cannot be achieved. It is also going through fundamental changes as both healthcare professionals and patients favor remote healthcare. And then last but not least, we have the disruption to the general economy. The magnitude of impact brought by this pandemic has been greater than that of the Great Recession of 2008. It is not certain how long the economic disruption will last due to factors such as new waves and their extent, the timing and success of vaccines and deployment. Right now, we're at the beginning of the economic crisis and the extended healthcare system crises. As a result of the pandemic, there is a significant healthcare system and patient backlog building. 120 countries at some point reported a form of backlog across various stages and operations, and we've put some examples on this slide. These include delays in surgery and treatment, as well as delays in new diagnosis. For example, in oncology, where it may require more invasive methods to diagnose a patient, or in rare diseases, there has been a big drop in referral systems and subsequent diagnoses. These are also therapy areas where we know early diagnosis leads to better patient outcomes, so a delay in diagnosis is really detrimental. Overall, there is a mounting backlog and there is great pressure to clear this backlog. It would require working at overcapacity, which of course is a challenge as regions and countries are still going in and out of lockdown. There is, however, ways to mitigate this backlog in the meantime. For example, by moving patients out of the hospital setting where possible to increase capacity. This can be enabled by moving to different modes of administration, such as maybe from IV to subcutaneous, and also through utilizing virtual channels where possible, and empowering patients to manage their disease better during these unprecedented times. The pandemic has also resulted in additional pressure on the entire healthcare ecosystem. And while the magnitude of the impact varies by region, there is highly disruptive behavior shifts observed across key stakeholders. And most developed markets are on the right-hand side of these metrics, showing that the magnitude of disruption has been high and will continue as such. And the behavioral shifts vary from stakeholder to stakeholder. For example, we see high technology and telehealth adoption from patients and providers across most key regions. There has been some budget reallocation from the payer perspective and a shift observed in the role of hospitals. However, the interconnected legacy systems in place in large hospitals mean that the change observed has been incremental and more oriented towards optimizing processes and efficiencies. The pharmacies have seen a drastic change in operations and a great switch to e-pharmacy with increased home delivery in most major markets. So these are some of the hallmarks of the post-pandemic environment, and as the impact of the pandemic will carry to unfold, and parts of the world are going through a second wave of coronavirus cases, one big anticipated event is, of course, the launch and availability of a safe and effective vaccine at scale. In this next section, we will take a look at the COVID-19 vaccine pipeline and initiatives that are underway to enable access. So prior to COVID-19, the vaccines market was demonstrating strong growth with a 11% annual growth rate, reaching 46 billion in 2017 and forecasted back then to reach 77 billion by 2024. The strong growth of this segment was driven by these key trends outlined on this slide. So firstly, it was driven by significant growth among key vaccine corporations and the entry of new vaccine manufacturers. In the years prior to the pandemic, the vaccines market saw a growing expansion and investment from both large multinational players as well as small emerging biotech and national players. And this was largely driven by demand, which brings us to the second point on this slide. The importance given to prevention and greater coverage across the globe. Governments who are major customers in the vaccines marketplace were committed and allocating funding for vaccinations related to diseases on their national immunization schedule. And lastly, the favorable vaccines pricing environment resulted in better pricing for newly launched products. So overall, the rate of innovation was fast and there was demand driving the growth in the vaccine market. Looking at the COVID-19 vaccine pipeline, development timelines are faster than ever before, and the demand is paramount. A quick disclaimer is due to the dynamic and fast-paced nature of the COVID-19 vaccine development efforts, these numbers you see on this slide are subject to change. So according to the World Health Organization, there are now more than 300 vaccine candidates in development, some of which that are utilizing novel technologies that are not been approved in human use before. Rapid progress has been made in record time to develop and clinically test COVID-19 vaccines, timelines that are much faster than ever before. So in about a year, more than a dozen of these candidates have reached large-scale clinical trials, with several candidates close to regulatory approval and one vaccine that was approved in the UK earlier this month for emergency use. And before this, the quickest vaccine to develop took around 4 years, so the difference in speed is stark. Lastly, this is truly a global effort. The right-hand side of this slide shows the key countries where the current late-stage vaccines are being developed. However, this is merely the beginning, and the next steps that need to be taken to effectively immunize the globe against the COVID-19 virus may be an even bigger challenge, testing our manufacturing capabilities, operations, and distribution channels worldwide. In fact, it would require almost double the vaccine manufacturing and distribution capabilities we had previously to deliver enough doses to patients globally. So in this slide, we take a look at some of the key global initiatives to deliver COVID-19 vaccine doses to patients, and hopefully these figures will give us an understanding of the scale of vaccination needed as part of an immediate response once approval in these geographies takes place. So there is the Operation Warp Speed initiative in the US that aims to deliver 300 million doses by January 2021. And also aims to accelerate the development and manufacture and distribution of COVID-19 vaccines. Since the end of March and up until now, the initiative has invested around 18 billion to support vaccine and therapeutic development, as well as their large-scale manufacturing and distribution, in return securing doses for the US. On the left-hand side, we've listed some of the key investments as part of this initiative across companies developing a COVID-19 vaccine. So many developed markets today have secured supplies for vaccine candidates through deals and advanced market commitments, raising some concern over the fair distribution of COVID-19 vaccines once available. The World Health Organization-led COVAX initiative aims to ensure the fair supply and distribution of vaccines and to deliver 2 billion doses by the end of 2021 through a two-phase program ensuring supply for smaller nations and poorer incomes. Of course, when we start talking about numbers and figures that are so large, we forget we're talking about vaccine candidates with different technologies and some that are highly sophisticated. The vaccines that are in late stage development today with promising results have different properties and therefore varying packaging, storage, and distribution needs, which are summarized in this slide. For example, the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine that utilizes mRNA technology requires the vaccine to be kept at ultra-low temperatures, which has many implications starting from its primary packaging to storage to supply chain. For instance, the vials used for the vaccines would need to be very resistant to thermal shock and with a low coefficient of thermal expansion. The high temperature sensitivity of the vaccine would also pose challenges in the distribution and delivery process, requiring lots of dry ice and specialist temperature-controlled containers for when the vaccines are in transit. The need for ultra-cold freezer systems for storage would also have implications on where vaccinations take place, potentially limiting it to large centers and healthcare facilities. So, in summary, there are numerous logistical challenges that add layers of complexity to the pursuit of delivering sufficient doses to patients in a fast and safe manner. Some other factors listed in this slide with implications are the dosing needed per patient, as this is usually more than one, as well as manufacturing targets per year for the different vaccines. So moving on to the last section of this presentation, we will on a high level highlight the implications and the demand created by the pandemic on the packaging industry and the important role packaging and drug delivery companies play in the response to the pandemic and in delivering vaccines to patients. So vaccine development differs from drug development in multiple ways, and nuances of vaccines are listed on this slide, on the left-hand side of this slide. So firstly, something we've discussed already is that they are more likely to be temperature sensitive. They are also more likely to be needed in large quantities in order to make an impact globally and eradicate diseases. There is also variation in the technology that is used to achieve the same end goal, which is to trigger a lasting immune response when administered. This, combined with the nuances brought by the pandemic, such as the sense of urgency, faster development timelines, and an unprecedented demand, has resulted in unique implications for the packaging and drug delivery of these vaccines. So firstly, the accelerated timelines mean that there is less time to select the packaging system and even less time to create a bespoke and tailored solution for vaccine candidates. The pandemic and the scale needed to achieve mass vaccination has also demanded many packaging companies to invest heavily and meet the rising demand in order to mitigate potential shortages and bottlenecks further down the line. Also, to ensure operations are available at needed scale as the vaccinations move through phases quickly. So the unprecedented demand also means that large-scale storage and specialized distribution channels are needed to deliver vaccines to centers. All of these nuances create varying levels of risk that may be encountered further along the vaccine journey. To support expertise and investment of packaging and drug delivery companies is paramount from the very beginning in order to mitigate risks across the COVID-19 value chain shown in this slide. And the points made in this slide focus on the immediate response. The solution would differ as the acute phase of the pandemic is managed. So these are some of the benefits and responsibilities that are of major importance to deliver high-quality vaccines to patients at speed. A portfolio of on-demand designs that are optimized to the various vaccine technologies, and integrated solutions early on to support the vaccine through all stages such as manufacturing, storage, and distribution, solutions for the delivery of safe and high-quality vaccines to avoid potential supply challenges, and scalable and cost-efficient packaging solutions. And by nature, these are highly specialized and specific solutions, which often require collaboration and a joint effort across companies. And some of these important points will be discussed in more detail in the following presentations. Thank you for listening. Tara, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yasemin, for a great presentation and a very comprehensive overview of the vaccine drug delivery market. I'd now like to introduce our second presenter, Kristopher Howard, Managing Director at NRL Enterprise Solutions. Chris is a vaccine and pharmaceutical consultant for organizations such as UNIDO, GIZ, and WHO, as well as global and LMIC vaccine and pharma companies. His work focuses on enabling mid-sized biotech and pharma firms to accelerate their growth through a mix of current facility operations optimization, planning for new facilities, and helping to secure strategic production partnerships. He is the author of 3 reports on vaccine manufacturing as part of an ongoing project conducted by UNIDO, WHO, and AVMI. In his former role at MSD, Chris evaluated and implemented local vaccine and pharma tech transfer deals to LMIC countries to facilitate MSD's global expansion plans. Prior to this, he was part of the MSD team responsible for designing, constructing, and optimizing production facilities around the world. In this role, he worked on new vaccine facility projects ranging in size from 15 million to 300 million. During his career, he has worked extensively in the US, Latin America, Africa, and Europe. So thank you for being here today, Chris, and over to you.
Thank you. So today I just wanted to talk through some of the topics which need to be discussed, first around vaccine manufacturing in the age of COVID, but then next also some of the topics that need to be discussed in terms of how to create a flexible vaccine formulation and filling manufacturing facility. So we see a very different global situation in the vaccines industry from what we saw a year ago. On top of all of the billions of vaccine doses we need to manufacture every year and distribute for normal vaccine usage, we're now seeing the need for billions of COVID vaccine doses on top of that. And we're seeing in various places around the world, because of that, this flu season in the Northern Hemisphere, there are flu vaccine shortages. I think that's more due to an increased uptake in flu vaccine purchases due to COVID. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg in terms of how the global supply chains may be disrupted. Governments are increasingly concerned about having their own vaccine production capabilities, and this is particularly true in middle income countries who do not have their own vaccine manufacturing capabilities. We see shifting market dynamics that were happening even before COVID, with growing population, increased immunization coverage, and new vaccine introductions. And some of the lower income countries where they may be looking to or getting ready to graduate from Gavi and start needing to self-procure their vaccines. Also, we're seeing a move from Western companies graduating again or shifting their focus to higher margin areas, and DCVMN manufacturers filling the gap behind that. And so we saw that with the Rototech supply agreement for West Africa, there to be a shift for Serum Institute and Barrett to fill that gap after Rototech was moved on to other markets. So I think in general, countries were already becoming increasingly worried about the security of their vaccine supplies. And with all this vaccine work happening due to COVID, I think we're also seeing some new near-term challenges in the sense of available expertise to do all of this vaccines work and technology transfers. There was a finite number of people able to do those in the past, and that hasn't kept track with all of the different changes that are going on in the world. And trying to find technology transfer partners is still a very big challenge for most organizations. So just briefly, in the last presentation, we talked about how long it typically takes to develop a vaccine. And yes, it does typically take 5 to 10 years. Here we see an example of one that would take roughly 5 years, which is typically pretty fast. Where we start with preclinicals, where vaccines are going into animals, moving into phase 1, which is primarily focused on determining the safety of a vaccine and usually includes dozens of people involved. Once we get a clear endpoint and safety results from that, we move into phase 2, which typically lasts about 1 year. And there we're really looking to make sure that we have the correct protective response in the body. So the right antibodies and T cells are being produced. Pending the data from there, we move into phase 3, which typically includes thousands or some cases tens of thousands of people to really check the efficacy of the vaccine, to really make sure that it's protecting against the infection or the disease that it's targeting. All the while we're looking into safety. In the age of COVID, we've really telescoped some of these stages to overlap with each other. So in order to get a vaccine out in the 12 to 18 month time frame, we're overlapping these, and in some cases beginning phases, well, in all cases beginning phases before the previous one is completely done. So in phase 1, we run some of the tests in clinical trials, and before phase 1 is completely finished, we move on to the next phase, phase 2. And a lot of this is really, the ability to do this is really enabled by a lot of the extra funding that was put in place by programs like Operation Warp Speed. And really, even though we're shortening the clinical trial period, we still need to ensure that the efficacy and long-term monitoring for safety still need to take place here. And these slides are adapted from a slide, or the single slide is adapted from a slide set that Jerome Kim gave at IVI, and I've provided a link below to explain in detail a little bit more about how some of these development timelines were compressed for COVID. So COVID vaccines, this coronavirus vaccine tracker, which is published by the New York Times, is already out of date. I just checked it this morning, and now we have a few more approved vaccines on the tracker. So it's literally changing every day, but it gives you a sense of how many different vaccines are actually in the pipeline. And as the previous presentation showed, there's roughly 300 vaccines in development in total. So it's a very dynamic global development space. And typically, the way vaccines were made in the past, you had a centralized bulk drug product facility, which then shipped out that drug product to regional formulation and filling facilities, or just multiple formulation and facilities around the world. So this traditional spoken wheel model often required multiple technology transfers. And what we're seeing right now with coronavirus is, in some cases, some vaccine manufacturers have still decided to use this model, but it's requiring an unprecedented number of technology transfers to take place throughout the world. So that's part of the reason why finding expertise around the world has become so difficult. So the next few slides that I will present are really garnered from a lot of the work that I've done for UNIDO in the past, which developed these different white papers, which really were geared towards trying to help organizations or governments who were new to the vaccine manufacturing industry to understand a little bit more about the vaccine industry. Interest in the industry is definitely ramped up over the past few years, but has seen unprecedented interest over the past few months due to COVID. But there wasn't a lot of information out there about how the industry worked, all the way from the market down to the technical manufacturing aspects of things. So these white papers were developed to try and to close that information gap. And please do feel free to reach out to me via email if you have any questions or would like links to some of these. They're all freely available on the internet. So when trying to figure out what kind of formulation and filling facility you want to make and how to scope out that type of a project, I think the biggest question we always need to ask ourselves are we going to do a forward integration or reverse integration? So if we look at the left-hand side of the slide, we start with the bulk antigen production of a vaccine. If you go even further to the left, which doesn't appear on this slide, you have to develop and scale up that vaccine or that vaccine product. As you move to the right, you move into formulation and filling, packaging, testing, product release, and then finally product distribution. So traditionally, we would move from the left-hand side to the right, beginning with bulk antigen production and ending with product distribution. But when you're trying to do a lot of technology transfers, as we are currently in this day and age, even pre-COVID, you would typically start on the right-hand side and move to the right when dealing with new vaccine manufacturers or just a new manufacturing facility. And that really enabled some of the vaccine manufacturing to be further distributed throughout the world. And obviously, when you're planning a new vaccine manufacturing entity or project somewhere in the world that doesn't have vaccine manufacturing capabilities currently, you first have to ask, do I start on the left-hand side and move forward, or do I work with a technology transfer partner and work backwards? And typically, like I said, what we see a lot of times is this reverse integration, but that makes a huge difference in the cost and timing of your proposed vaccine manufacturing facility and project. Financing a project. So there's always a lot of questions about how much these facilities cost, how long they take to set up. And after you figure out if you're going to do reverse integration or forward integration, the next kind of few things you need to start asking yourself are what kind of facility you need to make. So are we going to end up with a smaller facility, a larger facility? Is it going to be fully integrated, as in it will eventually have bulk vaccine drug substance being made there, or will it always just be form fill? And in the first white paper that I presented before, we really try and tackle this question. And really what it comes down to is you're most likely looking at tens of millions of dollars on the low end, easily into the hundreds of millions of dollars on the high end. And it really does depend on how big of a scale, and in some cases, what kind of products you're going to make. So I present these numbers here with a caveat that there's still a lot of different cost estimates and cost factors that aren't built into these numbers. And if you read through the white paper, you can kind of explore those different factors and apply them to your case. But typically, yes, we are talking tens of millions of dollars into the hundreds of millions of dollars, and easily 3 to 4 years at the lower end, and quite often over 10 years at the higher end if you're looking for a fully fledged drug substance through form fill and distribution. Again, these volume estimates that we ran here were typically at the lower end of what is expected. So, the rule of thumb is if you're going to do a formulation and filling facility, anything less than 10 million doses a year is typically not viable. and we ran our estimates at 10 million and 30 million. But what typically is done throughout the industry is, especially for a formulation and filling facility and even for a drug substance facility, you really start to get optimal production volumes around 50 million doses a year. So even that 10 million doses a year is on the lower end of the spectrum. Here, I talk just a little bit about some of the construction times. And again, it varies depending if you're talking about a forward integration or reverse integration. At the top of this slide here, I talk about the bulk drug substance facility, which in general takes roughly 4.5 years to build, and that's everything going very well, and the project working out very well. Formulation and filling, again, typically we would have estimated in the past 3.5 years. And I know some organizations say that this can move much faster, but I think there's two caveats to think about there. The first one is, not all projects that are slated to run 2 to 3 years actually take 2 to 3 years. So it's also very important to check those claims against actual reality in the end. And the other thing is, I think different organizations have tendencies to quote different timeframes based on what they're referring to. So you may talk to a facility design organization that says, yes, they can deliver a facility in 12 to 18 months or 12 to 14 months. But you have to look at what portion of the timeline they're referring to. In most cases, they're talking about facility design and construction through commissioning and qualification, but may leave out the part of the project where process qualification, process definition, validation, and registration take place. So it's very important to talk about the entire value chain and timeline of the process here when talking about how long things take. And that's what we've tried to do here. And again, if you were building these two vaccine facilities in parallel with each other, then yes, you could do the whole thing in probably about 4.5 to 5 years. It's going to require a lot of concurrent resources being on site and a lot of technology transfer happening at the same time. And therefore, there's a lot of risk. Whereas if you do something like a reverse integration, you may offset these two projects by 12 months. So you would finish the formulation and filling facility, and near the end of that, you would start doing the bulk facility. So typically what I've seen for most technology transfers around the world is that if you're planning to go all the way back to bulk drug substance production, you would end up with something near to a 7 to 10 year time frame. So, as vaccines have developed over the years and the technology keeps pace with that, we now have quite a number of different options when trying to decide how we build a vaccine facility these days. So 20 years ago, you'd be looking at all stainless steel equipment for your vaccine manufacturing facility. So you see the picture over here on the top right of big bioreactors, thousands of liters in volume, that take a long time to set up and have very high capital costs, but have lower operating costs than what we see today for a lot of the newer single-use systems, which you see on the left-hand side, which have lower capital costs, but typically higher operating costs. So, you have those different opportunities and options when designing a facility. And, again, 25 years ago, if you were going to build a facility, it was going to have to be traditional stick build, as the way we stick build very many houses. All the materials are brought to site and you build it up there and by brick, screw by screw, piping section by piping section. Whereas today, the use of modular facilities is much more widespread. And, we've been building modular facilities for easily 20 years into multinational industries or multinational companies. But, that allows, what modular construction allows you to do is design and build a facility typically much faster than stick-built facility. And really, you're building these facilities in a controlled warehouse somewhere in the world. And then you ship them to anywhere else in the world, and you kind of stack them back together like Lego, as you see down here in the left-hand picture. So definitely a new and highly innovative way to making vaccine facilities. And I wouldn't even say it's new at this point. It's tried and tested for the past 15, 20 years. And other kind of key operational decisions you need to make when deciding what kind of facility to make and what kind of, especially form fill facility, but also vaccine program that you want to go after. There's a lot of talk about, can we combine some products and production into a single facility? And, for the most part, formulation and filling facilities are quite flexible, and they can accept multiple different types of vaccines or even other types of products. But you do have some of these big delineating questions you need to answer. So the first one is, are you going for a liquid versus a lyophilized product? So if you have a liquid product, you don't need a large lyophilization units in your facility, and you're a little bit more constrained about what kind of filling technologies you can use. Live virus vaccine versus non-live virus vaccines. Basically, live virus vaccines can only be made in a facility with other live virus vaccines, and it requires different containment and engineering controls than you do for a non-live virus vaccine. So you kind of have to make a decision if you're going to make live viruses or not. Also, there's the idea behind, can we produce something that are not vaccines in the same facility? And there are certain biologics and sterile pharmaceuticals that can certainly be made in the same facility as a especially non-live virus vaccine. When you get into oncology products, those typically cannot be made in the same type of a facility as a vaccine facility. But there are quite a number of products that can be. The next question you have is, what kind of filling image you're going to use. So are you going to fill your products into vials, syringes, cartridges, ampules, blow fill seals? That's going to really determine what kind of filler you need. And the filler is really the heart of any formulation and filling facility. So different types of products are typically better suited for different types of filling images. One big question that we're pondering, especially during times of pandemics, are, should we use a single dose vial or syringe, or should we use multi-dose? So back at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was a huge question of, would we have enough glassware? And I'm sure our next presentation will definitely get into that. And so a lot of people, or even enough production capacity. And so a lot of people were suggesting that, hey, if we go to a multi-dose product, we can conserve the amount of glassware we need, as well as get more, a higher number of doses out of a fixed capital facility. So, and then lastly, especially when you're considering not developing these products on your own, it's important to figure out who that technology transfer partner can be, who you can work with to build your facility, especially if you're doing vaccines for the first time, or if you are an existing vaccine manufacturer but just want to expand your production portfolio beyond what your own development capabilities are at. So in conclusion, yes, we are seeing a lot of different opportunities arise because of COVID, and even beyond COVID or prior to COVID. So I think, as some people are putting it, vaccines as the vaccine people are finally the cool kids at school. There's a lot of interest and a lot of things going on in the vaccines industry today. And the market is changing very fast. So it's changing very fast before COVID. It's changing even faster because of COVID. And so therefore, it's a very dynamic time in the industry. And it's also quite important to understand, especially when we're talking vaccines more than a lot of other healthcare and certainly other industries, There's a lot of key stakeholders who all need to be aligned in order to make some of these vaccine projects and production projects viable. So governments, public, private firms, technology transfers, it really does require bringing them all together and aligning those their objectives. So thank you very much. Please, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is below, and back over to you, Tara.
Thank you very much, Chris, for a great presentation. And please do reach out to Chris via email if you would like more information or a copy of the white papers mentioned. So I'd now like to introduce our last presenter for today's session, Daniel Martinez, Product Manager at Stevanato Group. Daniel has held the role of Project Manager for Syringes, Components, and SG Lab at Stevanato Group since 2017. He is responsible for the development and go-to-market strategy of syringes and add-on components, as well as analytical services. He has experience in different aspects and functions, such as production, technical liaison, quality, project management, and sales. He holds a bachelor's degree in mechatronics engineering from the Instituto Tecnológico y de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey. Prior to joining Stevanato Group, Mr. Martinez had been covering commercial and operational roles in international companies dedicated to primary packaging. So Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Tara. So first of all, I want to say in this presentation we're going to cover, and we're going to touch points that both Yasemin and Chris already touched. So here we're going to have a helicopter view on what questions we need to ask ourselves when deciding which type of vaccine and what container vaccine is going to go into. So first of all, when we are developing a vaccine or any other type of drug, especially right now when we are talking about COVID-19, the first thing that comes to mind is we need to get to the market and we need to get there fast. So we usually have two main roads for vaccines. All the lab work, discovery, development is usually performed in vials, as these are the easiest to handle during in a lab setup. And the way to reach faster to the market is keeping the same container, as we already have all the work and stability studies done for this type of container. We keep the same container, and that's the fastest way we're going to get to the market. The advantages of using a vial is that this is actually a pretty versatile container. It's good for liquids, it's good for lyophilized products, is good for cryogenic, as we were seeing in the presentation from Yasemin, that some vaccines are required to be stored at -70 degrees. The vials are a good container and are suited for those processes. They're also good for powders. So this is the fastest way we're going to be able to reach the market. There is you also have the possibility of using the vials for a single dose or multi-dose. Chris was mentioning that, and correctly mentioning that for the COVID-19 vaccines, there was a big question mark as how are we going to get enough doses if we don't have enough filling capacities worldwide to sustain the standard vaccinations, so flu vaccines, for example, and on top of that, all the COVID-19 doses that are required. So using the vial gives you the possibility to have a multi-dose container. So you have many vaccines in one single vial, creating more availability of doses worldwide. The other road of development is what we see on the bottom graph, which is you start the discovery always in a vial, as I said previously, but then when you reach around phase 2, phase 3, you can start playing around with different containers. For vaccines specifically, the alternative container besides blow-fill seal, talking about glass containers, is a pre-filled syringe. This pre-filled syringe, though, has one big requirement and one big potential delay to the market, which is if you're filling in both vials and syringes, your drug product must be stable. It must be single dose in the containers. It has other advantages that we will touch along the presentation, but the main constraint, especially when developing, is the formulation must be liquid and the formulation must be stable in the syringes. Once we have already the marketed vaccines or the approved vaccines, then the life cycle management comes in place. This is quite important as well because, and we're seeing it today with the COVID-19 vaccines that have been recently approved for commercial use, for emergency use. So you have the vaccine already marketed in the vial, but as if we see the global trends of how the containers of vaccines are evolving, it's common to see that a vaccine migrates from a vial to a syringe once it's already known and established vaccine in the market. This is due to the ease of use of the vaccines and to the reduced amount of waste on a syringe compared to a vial. By waste, I mean vaccine waste, and I'll explain that in a little bit. So when we are entering now a life cycle management, you're changing from a vial, and you're most likely keeping the vial presentation in the market as it's already known and suitable for certain markets. But you are introducing also the syringe presentation of the same vaccine. Here you might encounter if your drug product or your vaccine was already in the liquid form and stable, then you're good to go because you are back in the first on the first graph where you go to the market initially with the vial, but you're already working on the development of the syringe. Otherwise, you will need to reformulate, and we'll go into an overview of that reformulation loop and decision loop in the next slides. But it's quite important to keep in mind, again, the type of vaccine and how the vaccine is going to be shipped and it's going to be formulated in order to see what are your options of container. The last flow is a flow that we expect to see also, especially because of COVID-19, is those vaccines that are already marketed in vials or in syringes. As Yasemin was explaining during her presentation, there is reluctancy of patients of going to hospitals, especially during pandemic times. So there is a huge question mark as in how are people, or if people are going to be willing to get the vaccination. So what we're seeing in interest in different companies is in changing or being able to supply the vaccination, as today we see with some of the biologics, which is take the care instead of being in the hospital to a home care. So you can do that through a syringe in an easier way than through a vial. This may require different safety systems or auto-injectors, as we already see in the market, but it's a trend that could potentially increase, especially due to COVID-19 impact. So on the right-hand side, we see a blue square saying what are the pros and cons of the different things. Here is mostly linked to the syringe. So a syringe today is applicable for liquid formulations. Cryo temperatures deep freezing temperatures still needs to be confirmed. There are some testing ongoing with different companies in which we are analyzing how the syringes perform before, during, and after those deep freezing stages in order to see if the current vaccines can also be potentially filled into syringes. One of the main constraints is that it's a single dose, which can be also used as a positive side. So when we are dealing with syringes, it's easier for the healthcare practitioner, or in case we take the medicine home, or the final user, so the patient itself, to use and apply the dosage of the vaccine required. There is a reduction of waste regarding the vaccine itself. So when we have a vial, in all containers, we always need to do some overfilling. In vials, especially in multi-dose vials, the overfilling needs to be substantial. So we need to be able to guarantee that the healthcare practitioner is going to be able to retrieve all the amount of doses accurately. For these, usually, since there is human interaction for the dosing, there is always an overfilling. So using a syringe, you will eliminate or you will reduce this overfilling because there is no more the error of dosing due to the human interaction. The other aspect of reducing the waste is linked to the amount of doses in one single container. If, for example, right now during COVID-19, we need to have, as I said before, the most available doses in the least amount of containers in order to do the mass vaccination. But this is something we need in the first and second stage of mass vaccinations. We expect, unfortunately, to be living with the COVID-19 for a good couple of years to come. So in the next years, 2023, 2025, we do expect a migration of the syringes going to the vaccines going to a single dose syringes, and this is linked to reducing the amount of wastage in a single vial. To give a quick example, if the vial has 10 doses and the doctor is only able to apply 2 doses of those 10 doses in the time that is required after the vial is the first dose is drawn from the vial, then the rest of the doses needs to be discarded. In the vaccine, this wouldn't be the case. So what do we need to think of regarding which type of container and filling technology, as Chris was saying, when we're talking about the primary packaging itself? So first of all, let's talk about what type of container, and of course, having only a limited amount of time during this presentation, we will not be able to go into all the exact details of all the steps needed. So excuse my really helicopter view of this, but this is what we need to think of. So we start with a drug product. If we develop the vial and we follow the flow on the bottom of the presentation, we'll see that we have the drug product in the vial. We do have to go through all the validations, studies, shelf life, extractables and leachables of the drug product. Then we go into the filling stage, and then after all, we can go to the market. If then we are actually changing or we are pursuing both the syringe and the vial, the first question we need to ask ourselves is the drug formulation liquid? And if it is liquid, is it stable? If both answers are no, then we need to enter the reformulation loop until we have the stable formulation in a liquid stage at, let's say, refrigerated temperatures. So once we are able to achieve this, then we go through all these standard validations in order to go to the filling and then go to market. This is, as you can see, just simply through the different loops and iterations we need to perform. We can see that using a syringe container is definitely not the easiest path to go to the market. So vials, again, are the preferred development work in order to go to the market as fast as possible. But if your drug product is liquid and it is stable in a syringe, then the work required for the syringe is as much as the work required for a vial. So what if we only had a vial and then we're changing to a syringe? So we never filled the syringe and we have no idea, we don't have the facilities. So first of all, you had taken the decision into migrating the drug product from a vial to a syringe. The first question you need to ask yourselves, and Chris was mentioning this, is, are you going to be able to fill in-house, or are you going to do technology transfer and use a partner? If you're gonna be using a partner, then you're gonna make sure that the partner has the format change available in order to process the container you wanna use, or the facility itself is adequate to handle your type of vaccine. If this is the case, then you need to perform all of the activities of technology transfer, validation, and then of course go to the market. On the other hand, if you are if you're planning to do in-house filling or building a new facility, but you don't have the filling line, or you're building a new facility again, you need to decide which type of filling line you're going to be, or filling facility you're going to be using. Are you only producing one type of vaccine? So are you producing, let's say, 100 billion of this doses of this vaccine? If that's the case, most likely your choice would be to use a standard filling line. So one design, one format, and just mass production of that one vaccine. But given the trend that we've seen, especially due to the biologics, was more towards the flexible filling line. These flexible filling lines, or these flexible facilities, are being of quite use, especially right now during COVID-19, because those facilities that are able to process other products than vaccines are now profiting from the flexible filling lines they had bought in order to produce as well as to produce vaccines as well. So what's happening is, or what happens is, if you have a seasonal vaccine, like for the flu vaccine, during the downtime where you're not actually doing fill and finish, you can be doing fill and finish for other products. This downtime is now supporting the COVID-19 pandemic effort, to fight the COVID-19 pandemic efforts. So just again, this is a really helicopter view of what we need to decide and the filling technology, but it's good to run the exercise before having any different additional comments. So what are the common formats for vaccines? When we're talking about vials, we see a huge differentiator between pharma, let's say, regulated countries or pharma emerging countries. So if we go towards North America and Europe, we see mostly single dose vials, so 2R, 6R, depending on the type of vaccine. But if you go to Latin America, Asia, Africa, you see a higher amount of multi-dose vials due to the cost of shipping and warehousing. On the other hand, for the syringes, the most common standard syringes used are 1 ml short or 1 ml standard syringes with the Luer lock adapter, so the ITC, so the healthcare practitioner can choose the type of needle, or the already staked in needle 5-inch to ensure an intramuscular injection. For intramuscular, let's say the split between the vaccine world right now is about 65% of the vaccines in syringes are using the ITC, so leaving the choice of the needle to the healthcare practitioner, and 35 of them are in the stake needle presentation. When we're using stake needle presentation, the 5/8 is the most common needle presentation that is required, and in 90% of the cases it's a 25 gauge 3 bevels. Still, there is a trend to change the 5 bevels to reduce the pain perception of the customer. The final market where you're targeting your vaccine will also determine which type of container you're going to use. Europe is a mix, North America is more towards ITC, and Asia it's more towards the RNS presentation. So overall, the trends, as I was mentioning, is 40% of the vaccine containers. So not the doses, but the containers used today are syringes. Of this, we see a higher increase in syringes than vials. So this confirms the trend that once the vaccine is marketed, the trend is to change from a multi-dose vial to a syringe. As both Yasemin and Chris were mentioning, there are way more over 180 vaccines in development. This slide is a couple of days old and is already very outdated. But out of these 180 vaccines that are in development, only 3 of them are launched in syringes. The rest are all launched in vials. So the current filling capacity, which is being expanded, and also the capacity for producing the vials itself is expanding by all players, not only by Stevanato Group, is not sufficient to cover the need for COVID-19. So the use of syringes can help mitigate this gap in vaccine doses required. As I mentioned, there are advantages of using the syringes, but there are also advantages of using some vials. So the advantages of the vials are the single store, the storage or of the storage room for multi-dose is reduced compared to the vaccines. It's a proven and versatile available solution. Of course, there is ease of transportation as the shape of a vial is easier to transport than the syringe in a blister. And you are able to use the current installed flexible lines. For further information, you can contact me personally during my email. So thank you very much, and Tara, back to you.
Great. Thank you very much, Daniel, for your presentation, which concludes today's session. I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their time and their expertise today, and especially our sponsor, Stevanato Group, for their support, and of course our audience for your attention. We hope you enjoyed this webinar and will enjoy the remainder of the CPHI China Virtual Expo Connect. Thank you.